Today, we're going to be talking about how you can integrate improv into your clinical work with clients. As you know, I love talking about different modalities that typically you might not see in the practice. And I wanted to bring Yehuda on here today to really encourage you that if you're interested and passionate about something and it's helped you with your own healing, I promise you there is an ethical and professional way to bring it into your practice. There's just some pieces and frameworks you just want to make sure are there. So why don't you introduce yourself to everybody?
Hello. All right. I am Juda Alcabes. I started going by Judah about a year ago.
Oh,
Judah
sorry.
Alcabes. Yeah, no, that's all good. Judah Alcabes, licensed clinical social worker, and I use improv theater as as an intervention, as a part of my treatment. And it's it's been a wild journey, and I guess I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got into it and how I started integrating it. But it really fits well with what Tina focuses on all the time, which is using your creativity and yourself and the things that you're passionate about, but then also really doing it in a very clinically sound and ethical way. And
Yeah.
so my journey with improv has a lot of that, a lot of the searching for the ethics in there, which I'm going to talk a little bit about at points. So that's kind of me. I'm not using slides today. I don't know if I was supposed to or not, but I'm just going to
I
talk.
never expected you to. I purposely didn't plan on what we were going to talk about because you are the improv therapist. So I was like, screw it. We'll just see how this all goes today. But what I really appreciated and I just want to highlight is that, you didn't get into improv because you were like, this would be great in therapy. You got into it for different reasons. And I remember when you did, which I feel was about like maybe like a year and a half ago-ish. Maybe I'm wrong
More
with
than
it.
that, longer.
More
It's
than
about
that.
two and a
Okay.
half.
Well, then you didn't start talking about it to me about a year
That's
and a half ago.
correct. That's correct.
Um, and like you needed it to spark this part of you that had been dormant for some time. Because during that time it was like the dissertation, getting that all together, and you were just like, I'm feeling so disconnected. And then that's when you started talking about improv a little bit more. So like, yeah, why don't you tell us how you got started on your journey?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go all the way back to the beginning of my life when I was born, really in high school. So what happened in high school? I went to a religious high school, and in the religious high school, it wasn't like a very very strict school to the point where you couldn't do anything fun at all, but they were very nervous about fun things that it would get to whatever non-religiousy.
Calm it
Um,
down.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. So they were nervous about it. So they would have electives every trimester or whatever, semester, I don't know. And they had an acting elective given by one of the teachers who, not a Jewish or religious person, who had some background in acting. And we started out the elective once a week doing improv games. And so improv games, what's called short form improv, where you make up little scenes and you have little instructions like you're not allowed to say this word, or you have to say it, you have to hop the entire, like things like that, right? And um and I remember feeling so comfortable, and this was me feeling who never felt comfortable in school, in class, and anywhere, but I felt so comfortable being allowed to be kind of wacky. The school kind of jumped in after they found out that there were too many inappropriate jokes being made in the improv section of things. Um, but and then they changed it to like monologues, which they didn't like the monologues either. But either way, I do remember that as a point in my life where I saw to be dramatic about it, I saw a little light cracking through,
Mhm.
in the darkness that I would feel a lot of the time. But it was very short-lived, and it disappeared pretty quickly. Now, a bunch of years later, actually, no, not a bunch of years later, about a year or two later, I was still pretty into like doing improv, even though I had nowhere to do it and I had no one to do it with. And my friends asked me what I wanted to do. This is my first year in college, and what I wanted to do for my birthday. And I said, I want to get really drunk and do improv games. And so uh, we did that and it was super fun. And so now I fast forward to a couple of years ago, and I kind of just took this improv class on a whim because I was like, hey, I'm going to take a day off. I've never tried this before, like in a formal way. I just signed up for it and I drove to Davie, Florida, and I walked into the room and I was like, what's up? I'm here for improv. And I loved it. And I started going every week. And so that was in like July, and my birthday's in December. And I went there one night and they asked me, how are you doing? What's going on? I was like, oh, today's actually my birthday. And they said, well, what are you doing for your birthday? And I said, this. And it was like a weird moment. And then I had a flashback to that when I was 18 with my friends, and I was like, this is not the first time that I'm choosing to do improv on my birthday. And it was part of a lot of realizations that I was having at the time from about my creative self and how I'm drawn to the same things over and over again, and how we all are kind of drawn to the same things over and over again. Maybe it changes, maybe our life changes, right? Like maybe we're adults and, our version of what we loved when we were kids, it's a different version of it. But it really started to highlight for me that this is a very significant part of my existence, is being playful, being creative, being fun, connecting with others. And that I'm going to talk about a little bit too. The core of improv being that you connect with other people and you co-create. And there's a certain feeling that you get when you and this other person who had no idea where this whole thing was going somehow ended up arriving at a place where it was super fun and it was entertaining and way more creative than what you would have come up with if you sat with a pen and paper for 3 hours.
Yeah.
So when I started to realize that this spoke to me in a very, very deep way, I was 100% sure that I was going to keep doing it in my own life. What I really, really hesitated about was including it in my professional life. In my professional life, I had two concerns. One concern was judgment. People will look at a professional who is, playing doing an improv scene where he's I don't know, I'm trying to think of one that we did recently a few weeks ago with my clients. This one actually made me feel a little uncomfortable, and I was like, oh, that was a good growth moment. For whatever reason, the suggestion was that we were in like a 70s, we're in the 70s in a town where disco is illegal, and we had to make up the scene after that. And I don't really like dancing in front of other people. It's just, I don't know. It's just not something I'm comfortable with. But I was doing it, right? So there could be judgment on that. There could
Yeah.
be definitely people being like, what kind of a therapist are you if you're doing a footloose scene with your clients? Like what is happening right now, right? So that was one. And then the other one was I really, really wanted to be sure that this wasn't just a personal experience, that I would then be forcing my client, or not forcing them, but be pushing on my clients as a valid intervention without searching whether it is a valid intervention.
Yep.
And so I took a long time. I really took a long time. Maybe, I want to say 10 months. Okay, let's say like this. 10 months after my first improv class that I went to, I did my first improv group with my clients, and that was 10 months where I was researching it and I was writing about it and I was reading about it. Like I wasn't just like taking more improv classes and going, "Oh, this is great. I should do this with my clients. I should do this." I was like, "What's the theory behind it? Why would it work? Why would it work for some people and not other people?" And are there different types of people that it would work for if it was done differently? Like all of that. I hit the book so hard. And at a certain point, my son, who is 10 years old, I guess he was like 9 then, he was starting to like really read well. So he like was looking at my books. He's like, Daddy, how come all of your books say improv? Right. And the
This
reason
is
why,
so you, because it doesn't matter like what it was, if there was an assignment for class, because for those of you who don't know, Ehud and I were in the same doctoral class together. You'd be like stack of books constantly, like, you didn't really like going online. You would, but it's not your thing. You liked the deep books like of like the history, and you like, did you know back in like you do take your time. And I love that you did that. And I think what you were talking about, like the fear of the judgment, it is real. And honestly, I think we should respond to the fear of like we may or may not be moving professionally, ethical, or or whatever as clinicians because it makes us accountable to go out and figure it out. So we don't have to walk around hiding
Right.
practices and we can move with confidence. And then we get to model that for clients that healing can look an array of different ways and it's totally okay.
Right. Right. And I will say that, it's interesting that at the top of this, you were mentioning that I may not have told you about improv. Um, and that was a conscious decision to not talk to anybody about it for a
Yeah.
little while. Not even friends. I didn't talk to anybody about it. Um, Somebody told me this a while ago. He told me that he read in a book that anytime you have a new idea, which is really, really exciting, you should wait before you share it with somebody, even if you're sharing it with the most supportive person, the most understanding person. You should sit with it a little bit. And if I remember correctly, the reason why he was saying that was because even the best ideas are vulnerable when they're
Mm,
first born. They're like an infant, right? And they're so fragile. And so you might deliver it in a way that is kind of incomplete because
yeah.
it's still being born, sort of. And you might, the most supportive, sharing, caring person, understanding person might just kind of like knock it down a little bit, and then you might give up on it,
Yeah.
right? So, um, because I remember why I was trying to explain to him this whole idea that I had in my head about how, like, basically, if you want to engage a crowd, an audience, if you view it like IFS, then you can see that there's different parts that make a whole. I was trying to explain this whole thing to him, and he was like, I kind of hear what you're saying. I want to tell you this thing that I read, and I was like, you're right. Yeah. Anyway, so
You get really excited and I think for you always kind of and I'm kind of like this too. It's like we're cart before the horse and then all of a sudden we're like wait. Like I think we could scale this back just a little bit to have this make more steps or deliverable steps. But I
yeah,
think that spark of creativity is so important for us because we know when we got something,
yes,
and I think that's important. But yeah, I hear you. Like I can't tell you how many times I've been discouraged in my belief system about something because maybe I didn't know enough about it.
right,
And that is damaging. Like, and I think someone in this group recently posted that they talked about their love of Reiki and how they want to find a way to integrate it into their clinical practice. And their professor at school was like, no, 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 that's never going to happen. That can never happen. And, I laugh because I'm like, as when we're students, we look at these professors as they got it, right? Like they know it, whatever they say goes. But we forget that most, at least in the master's program, not everyone is in actual practice. Not everyone is really aware of the cultural changes that are happening out in the field because they're kind of more in that professor capacity. And then people get discouraged and they believe it.
yes.
And when my professor told me that, like, I shouldn't be a social worker, and I was like, oh,
Right.
and I carried that for like 10 years.
Right, right. Oh, 100%. And I can think of times where I got shot down and how I carried it for longer than I needed to.
Yeah.
And to take it even a step further is that um you reminded me of when I was coming up with my topic for my dissertation. I don't know if I
Mhm.
ever talked to you about this, but I had an idea and I ran it by Dr. Platt. And Dr. Platt was like, no, it's not that significant. It's not that interesting. And just to put in perspective who Dr. Platt is to me, Dr. Platt is beyond supportive,
Yes.
and like
He's
Dr. Platt
amazing.
is right. And he was not saying no to the idea. He was saying no to the half-baked idea that I shared with him. And it was almost like if I watch the tape, the instant replay of it, I will see that I gave him something that wasn't fully formed, and then
Yep.
he rejected it, not because the idea was bad, but because I delivered something that wasn't solid yet. And I thought about it for a little while, like in hindsight, and I was a little bit like, why would Dr. Platt be so quick to dismiss my idea? And then I don't know, a long time later, I was like, I think if I really wanted it, I should have stuck with it, and then he would have come around because he would have seen where I was going with that.
Yeah. I had the same thing happen. I don't know anyone who's really had a one and done shot on their like dissertation topic, like for sure. And I forgot to mention to the group, if you have any feedback or questions or anything for either of us while we're on the call, please go ahead and write it in the chat. And if you like what you're hearing, thumbs up, hearts always work. Um, but I remember I had a big idea. Like it was, I wanted to test a certain modality. I wanted to look at the brain waves because I worked for that neuroscience place. Wanted to do GAD and GAD-7 and PHQ-9 testing on all this stuff. And I remember them saying, "This is going to take you like 4 years." And I was like, and all I heard was, "What you want to study, you can't." So this was a complete failure. And really, like, it took Dr. Gonzalez saying, what do you know already about this? Like, you're really excited about this, but like, do you have enough fundamental footing to do this? And he was like, I was like, yeah, it's important in social work. He said, why? And I looked it up and I was like, shit, we don't have anything on this yet. So
Right.
he's start there. He's like, you need to build this concept and why it's important, and then you can, set the stage for bigger things. But I remember being so disappointed, calling my friend, like, I wasted a whole year. Because, at that point, by the time they tell us like what our wish, our hopes and dreams are not going to happen, we're already a year in.
Yeah, you're stuck.
So
Yeah.
we're like, well, what do we do? Do I just drop out? Or like, and it's like getting your doctorate, whoever on here has like love and gratitude to you, because like it is hard stuff. Like you will get challenged on the next level of like you think you're good and solid, and then it's just like a bowl of anxiety for 3 years.
Yeah. I have said that the thing I learned the most from the doctorate program was self-discipline.
Yeah.
That more than anything, being able to be like, okay, you got to stay on it. It's okay. You don't need to beat yourself up. You just need to do a little bit more. You just need to do a little bit more for sure.
Yeah.
Um, I'll say this about theory and figuring out why things work and why things are good. I see it as having two benefits. So one is it justifies what you're doing from an ethical and clinical standpoint, right? So if you really have the theory, not like you just like you match the theory, you're like, oh, this is the theory that goes with this, but like you really understand the theory,
Yeah.
right? So it really justifies it, and it makes it, as long as you're doing everything ethical in general, it really backs up why this is ethical, which I would say is both that clients aren't getting harmed, but also that clients are getting what they're signing up for, which is interventions and help with their mental health, right?
Yep.
Because you could easily take something which is not harmful and then just promise it as some sort of healthy intervention thing.
Yep.
I would say that that's unethical too. And somebody might come back at me and say, what are they losing by that? They're not getting hurt at all. There's no harm being done. And I disagree with that, because I think that if you're promising mental health treatment from a professional, then you have to offer something more than this is good, like a good time.
Yeah.
Right. And that was where I spent a lot of time. That was one of the reasons why I spent a lot of time really trying to understand the theory behind improv, and if not trying to fit it in, but if it makes sense to use it clinically. The
Yep.
other thing that I think that having your theory rock solid allows you to do is it allows you to make adjustments to your treatment based on what the client is bringing to you, because you know what the goals are and you know the path to get there because you've studied it, right? So like, for example, I know a lot of people who are excellent improv teachers, way better than I am. They've been doing this forever. They wouldn't know how to adjust it to make it a mental health intervention,
Yep.
because that's not the way that they think. They didn't study the theory. They studied improv, which is not their job because they're not offering improv therapy,
Yep.
right? So like, I know that I could have run an improv class after, taking three classes, like, okay, I'm going to do what they did in the class, whatever. Right.
Yep.
But like, if you're doing it clinically, then your goals you need to set a much higher standard for
Yep.
what you're delivering. Right. So I think the theory it both sets the stage for the creative intervention, but then it also, it reinforces it as you go, because if you're just like, that was an awesome improv class every single time, or you're just like, we had a lot of fun every single time, So why is it mental health there? Why is it treatment?
Yeah.
Right? So then if somebody asked me why it's treatment and how I believe that this this activity is helpful, so then I will know what it is that I'm offering to them,
Yeah,
right?
like I also think that, you're talking about that flexibility, right? So it's like if you understand the basics of the creation of the modality, then you have flexibility. You're not so rigid in this approach. And I think my concern that happens a lot is when you have these, empirically supported treatment models that have been developed, people know the modalities, they learn the modalities, they get the workbook. The last thing they know about is the theories that influenced the
Right.
creation of those modalities. So a lot of times when I ask therapists, okay, like what are the clinical theories that influence your work? They are telling me modalities. And I said, yeah, but do you know the theories that have actually helped someone create that? And they're
Right.
like, no. And it's fine. I know it's a system failure, like I get it.
Right.
However, it's still a professional responsibility. Something that you knew how much I hated theory when I first started school because I held on to the trauma from my last theory professor. I did for years and maybe more than 10. But then it was like when I reframed it, I was like, wow, like this gets you solid as a clinician if you understand all the pieces because now, if you're doing CBT and it's not working, you're like, I'm just gonna throw the whole thing out. Well, we can take pieces, we can buffet it a little bit. But if you understand the beliefs and concepts of where the goal, now you can get a little creative on how to do that. And that's where I also think like complementary and alternative practices we have some flexibility if we know how we're using the intervention to move us along this common goal of this. So, like,
Yeah.
if you're in psychoanalytic exploration and then you're really noticing something stuck, and then you're like, okay, like, we can't cognitively bust through this. And then you want to bring in Reiki to kind of shift somatically through the body, energetically, like, it's still moving everything in that direction. If you understand, you know, energy-based practices and if you understand psychodynamic theory and you you get all these pieces or polyvagal whatever like you can be like oh that's why I'm doing this
Yes.
and like that's where you can actually get creative as a clinician versus so rigid in the
Yeah,
textbook therapist as I call
absolutely. And that's where I was thinking about this earlier today, actually yesterday. Um, is therapy an art or a science? And we had a lot of discussions about that early in our doctorate
this
program. Reading a
reminds
lot
me of
of
when they
articles.
had the continue I think Platt had the continuum of like the different types of research she's like qualitative to
Right.
quantitative and like post what I don't even remember all of it but I was like I don't know. All? Both?
Right. Yeah. Is therapy an art or science, right? And I was with a group of teachers yesterday doing a professional development for them with improv, and I asked them the same question: is teaching an art or a science? Right?
Mm.
Is practicing medicine an art or a science? Is religion an art or a science? Right? Because religion has rules, and then there's the spiritual expression of of the religion. And is that is it, does it sometimes supersede the rules? Is the spirit more, more significant than the structure and the rules, right? We know that without any structure, then we're not doing anything, right? Because that, if you were a therapist that was like, I'm a therapist that doesn't have an office, doesn't schedule things, doesn't have guidelines, doesn't have an approach at all. I just help people. That's not anything, right? That's all spirit, right? We also know that in the age of technology and AI and being isolated during COVID and all of that, we've still come back to human interaction
Yep.
when we could say that, science is probably taken the place of people, and therapists should be obsolete because AI can do it. AI
Yep.
can't AI can't do it because they're not human, and it doesn't have the artistic and creative abilities that a
Mhm.
human being has.
Yep.
So um art and science being a spectrum, right? And as therapists, when we say, when we look at that spectrum, I would say as a whole, our profession has gravitated too far to the science side of things.
Yep.
This is my opinion, and people can bite me if they want. I know in this group, you guys aren't going to bite me, but send it out there, see what happens. Uh, Our profession has gravitated too far to the science. I would tend to make the argument that a lot of professions have gravitated too far to the science, but specifically our profession,
Thank you,
I have
Flexner.
what?
Thank you, Flexner.
Yeah,
The,
oh, yeah, Flexner. Yeah, look that up. Um, specifically too far to the science because the 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 way that a lot of social work education and psychology education, not just social work, mental health education, is set up now is very much in the prescriptive sense and the diagnostic sense, and very much like, do you know the structure of this diagnosis gets this treatment because we've proven it this way using the scientific method. And anybody who's in practice, even if you're in your practicum and you're in your internship, when you start meeting with clients face to face, all of that shit doesn't work anymore. It just doesn't work anymore because this guy comes in and he's like, oh, I have a hard time understanding what you're saying sometimes because one of my ears, I'm deaf in one ear. So you're gonna have to like incorporate that in, right? Meaning like that's okay. So I have to make that kind of adjustment, right? And then it's I'll give you a good one. A client once told me that the word mindfulness is very difficult for her because every time she did something goofy or dumb when she was younger, her dad would go, "You got to be more mindful," right? So if I was following the science and the research rigidly, and I would say we're doing mindfulness now, and I never paid attention to her reaction to and give her the space to be able to share. This is how I kind of like my relationship to that word, right? And which led to a good conversation, which led to me being able to tailor my treatment more. Where when I want to talk about mindfulness, I just didn't say mindfulness. I would just say being grounded or being present or something like that.
yeah.
Um, that's the artistic side, right? So all the stuff where we're taught that this is the way, the tried and true way to do it goes out the window when you sit face to face with an individual and you have 45 minutes with no script, right? And you are improvising because we're
Yep.
always improvising in session. Even if you've seen this client for 15 years, you don't know what happened between the last session and this session. You don't know what
Yep.
mood they're going to be in, right? You have no idea what they're bringing to you today. So you can have all the science in the world that you want and all the rules, but when this client says, I never thought about this thing before, but now this is on my mind. Okay, so I adjust to you, right? Which is not the way
Been
that,
there where clients like, all right, this is gonna sound a little, and now I'm
yeah.
like, okay, all right, okay, like what are they about to say?
Yep.
Uh, but the crazy thing is this pipeline of information that we have to move more scientific and be more of a biomedical model, and that we need to use empirically supported modalities that have been tested for this and that. I think I may have spoken to you the time that I was looking at all the state boards and was like, this language ain't in there.
Right.
So where is this coming from? It's not
No,
in the,
I think
it's
right. Go ahead, go ahead.
no, that is it. It's like it's not in the code of ethics, it's not in the state boards, but it is in the syllabus as a competency. Why?
Right. I actually think that it's somewhat artificially created by our profession, more
Mhm.
in what I would describe as a culture
Yeah.
that culture is invisible rules, right? Like family systems have rules. You just know don't do this, right? You
Yep.
just know that if dad goes into the office and shuts the door, that means, to quote one of my clients, that meant don't fuck with him right now, right?
Yep.
And so like you just know, right? I think our profession has a culture with a lot of invisible rules. And some of those invisible rules are things like these are acceptable things and these are not acceptable things. And you don't want to make yourself look like you do the unacceptable things.
Yeah.
Now, from there, though, I would say that the reason why, so this would be my theory brain, the reason why those invisible rules are there is because it's very easy to look like a seasoned professional when you have the lingo down and you say that everything that you do is evidence-based. It backs you up. It becomes the authority. So you don't need to be egotistical and say, I am the authority. You
Mhm.
let the research do that for you. And the
Yep.
research, what are you going to argue with research? How could you argue with research?
Yep.
Like the research states this. So what if I'm not responding well to it? Or what if I have another theory? Right. So I think it's a protection for a lot of clinicians to be able to say everything I do is evidence-based. And if
Yep.
everything I do is evidence-based, you're going to argue with the evidence. What are you talking about?
And then, do people even understand what evidence-based means? Because an evidence-based practice and an empirically supported treatment modality, two different things.
Yeah.
And there's all these pieces that people don't understand. And me personally, I think even if you are bringing in an empirically supported treatment modality, let's just say CBT, whatever, you should still be talking about the risks. You should still be talking about the theory that's aligned with it. You should still be looking up the research available and are you using it the way that it actually was researched?
Right.
I feel like because, oh, we just say that we do this, we don't have to show our due diligence that we understand the process.
Right.
But I feel like even like with EMDR, which I think I very much love, but I'm also like, how much do you really understand and know about the practice, the risks? How much are you talking about that in
Yeah.
session? And some therapists are and amazing, great. But I will say a majority, they're not. And the reason they're not isn't honestly, I think it's just because they don't even know that they should because of this invisible rule that if you just say you do this, you're good. No one's gonna challenge you.
Yeah. Yeah. Like imagine I said I would love to do this where I give the same kind of presentation to clinicians two times. One time I say I do improv therapy, and the other time I say I do evidence-based improv therapy. And I would love to see the difference.
Yeah.
And could I say that it's evidence-based? I could say it's evidence-based. I could because
There is evidence
I've
on
researched.
improv.
What?
There is research on improv
There
and
is, yeah, there's research on improv, so it's evidence-based. But then there's research on everything,
yeah,
right? Just because you say that you're based in the research doesn't mean that you're based in good research, and it doesn't mean that it's good for your client either,
yep.
right? And so there's the protection, and I think the people holding up those protections the strongest most of the time are the ones that really, really feel threatened by the question of, do you know what you're doing, or do you just like know what you want to say to make it seem like you know what you're doing?
And I'll be honest, like I was definitely a version of the one that just don't ask me the question. I'm gonna just pass on by for a while. But like I have to say that feeling of incompetency, I guess I'll call it, or like imposter, whatever people want to call it. Like it's a such a yucky feeling.
Yeah.
And you can't wash it off. You can't shake it off. Like you literally have to grow through it and
Mhm.
cut it out. Like it's such a crappy place to be in as someone who has like we all have our master's degree. Like that's a big thing to say that we were masters or experts in this. That's why I was so pissed off when I graduated and I still had questions.
Right.
I was like, I shouldn't have any more questions.
Right.
Like I've literally there's nowhere else to go for information. Like I've hit here and I still had some. Like and then that like literally drove me crazy. But it was like, okay, well now I just gotta figure out the information I need so I don't have questions anymore.
Right. Right. And that's the responsibility of the individual clinician. And if you actually are connected to your job, your role in these people's lives, right? You put yourself out there as somebody that can help them and that is worth them spending their resources on you,
Mhm.
right? So if you take that job, that role seriously, so then you don't want to just look like you know what you're talking about. You want to know what you're talking about because while you might get a billion likes on social media for putting up something like, hey, give yourself a break today and don't forget to do self-care, when you're sitting with a client who's schizoaffective and his mom is there saying, how do I handle him? Right? Like all those
Yeah,
likes don't mean shit.
100%. But I also think, the part that makes you really a good therapist is the healing journey. Like you
Yes.
use improv to heal yourself.
Yeah.
And then you did some research, then you brought it in. And
Yes.
I feel like people skip those two parts or they learn it to teach it versus like, you know, learn it to model it
Right.
with the effect of also like using it as a teaching moment. Like I feel like people they just overdo it. Like people are like, oh yeah, I do CBT. I'm like, do you practice CBT on your own?
Right.
Like, do you participate in EMDR sessions? Like, are you? like, have you experienced this? Like, is this something that you use, or is it something that you think you should use? And, there's kind of like not that intimate space of the practice.
Yeah, yeah. I think that there's a major part of that is that once people start to feel personal success with any form of treatment or healing, it's very tempting to want to offer that to other people because look how it opened me up, look how it changed me. And that's not wrong. That's great. I think that's part of the human spirit that wants to give to other people. I think that it's there's a real danger in that
Mhm.
because when it worked for you, let's take from a scientific kind of lens here. You are a variable in this experiment that is different than the next variable that will be different than the next variable, right? So if you say that something worked for you, then you try to just assume that you can have it work on someone else, you're not considering literally any of the scientific data which said that this reaction happened with this combination of things, right? And I'll give you a really good example of that is right now breath work is really popular, right? And a lot of people are teaching breath work without having a lot of experience with any mental health treatment or any mental health knowledge at all. They are just enamored by this concept of, releasing your breath in different ways and it being freeing and all that kind of stuff, right? And a very good friend of mine went to a breathwork session, and she's not the type of person to like get into this stuff, but she went because her friend was going, and she was like, "I want to try it out." And there was a woman next to her that was doing her breath work in a way that she was releasing like a combination of like screams and orgasms.
Wow.
Okay. And my friend went, got so overwhelmed, you could say triggered, that she went into the bathroom and just was texting on her phone until it was over. Okay, because she was like, I'm overwhelmed by this person who's screaming next to me. Now
Yeah.
you could look at that a number of ways. You could look at it as some sort of a trauma reaction, or you could just look at it as a human discomfort thing,
Yeah.
right? Now, fine. So not everything is going to work for everybody, right? But then after it was over, my friend reached out to the instructor and said, "Hey, I just want to let you know this was the experience I had." And this is where I really zone in on the lack of training and the lack of awareness is damaging. Her response was, "This is good for you because now you can see what came up for you."
Damn.
I'm like, that's messed up. That's messed up. You created an unsafe scenario for this other person
Yep.
and you're not willing to take ownership of it, but you don't even see that you're doubling down on it. You're like triple gas. I don't even know. It's not good, right? And so like, but I happen to know the instructor, and I think she's a really good person. I just think that
Still
she's
educated and just
not
needs to be.
educated, right? Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. There's no like, and that's the thing. I think people can't accept. We have to be open to feedback. It doesn't mean that we fail. It doesn't mean that we're getting shamed. But unfortunately, at times, our concepts come off as shaming, which is something else. Like if we want change to happen, we can't be engaging in shaming reactions to people. I say this like so many times that if like you can't get your point across without shaming someone, like you're not as rooted in your beliefs as you thought you were.
Right.
So like you
Right.
might want to check that. So
Right.
like let's be a little bit more accountable in that area.
Yeah.
Or like, I've participated in so many different breathwork sessions. Some I'm literally like dizzy, spiraling out, like me against me, like this. I'm like, this is horrible. And then at the end, I'm like, whew, that was great. Kind of like it was a marathon. And I was like, okay, I finished. It was good. But then I'm never doing that again.
Hmm.
Like also. And I've only gotten sessions like that from people who are not therapists. So they didn't really like to me, I didn't really get the full gamut of the risks. Like this is going to happen and then this might happen and like
Right.
I would like to be more informed
Right.
versus
Yeah.
being people think breath work it's just work is for a word like it's a lot of efforting depending on how you do it.
Yeah.
And every single time it's been a different experience for me. And if you're going to be bringing it in, you have to know all of those different things that could come up possibly for a client
Yeah.
all the time. And like
Yeah.
put that in your informed consent, but know it, honor it, give people an out. Like your friend should have been, hey, if anything in this space is overwhelming for
Right.
you, you absolutely have the opportunity to remove yourself from and I'll process that with you later or
Right.
something. But yeah, that's why I personally think if we're moving in our profession the right way, therapists make a wonderful avenue to integrate more creative modalities or unconventional modalities into the space because we are expected to uphold certain levels of professional standards and give informed consents and talk about risks. And we're supposed to be doing it with integrity.
Right.
Not saying that everyone does that, but if we were moving in the profession as we should, that would be nice.
And I think that the upside is so much higher because once when we are that creative and safe as clinicians, then we start to really do our best work as therapists, right? Like people don't think about this. Where we're up to in 2024 is that the profession of psychoanalysis is like 100 and whatever you want to call it, 120 years old. That's even a little bit of a stretch. It's a
Yeah.
little more than 100 years old, right? That means that a little more than 100 years ago, Freud was just screwing around and then documenting it and then saying, I think this worked, I think this didn't work, right?
Yep.
And then he had his disciples who were also screwing around and they were like, I think this worked, I think this didn't work. Then they would debate about it, right? Sandor Ferenczi, one of his closest students, who they had like a weird ass relationship, like a father-son relationship that was like super unhealthy or whatever. He experimented with something he called mutual analysis, which was where the therapist and the client switch in the middle of the session and start processing the other person's shit,
Wow.
right? So I always thought it would be something like, if I was doing that as a therapist, I'd be like, oh, yeah, I think we covered a lot today. Now do me.
Do me.
But
Do me, do me, do me, do me now.
do me. Right, right. Like,
There is something about that I find very intriguing, like to see
yeah,
how it goes.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the interesting one of the interesting findings from that was that he found that there was the he really focused on the therapist patient relationship, meaning that maybe he took it too far with the reversal, right? But he was the theory that was driving that experiment was we need to genuinely connect to each other,
Mhm.
right? So let's like make this like a real relationship. And so when mutual analysis didn't work out, he didn't abandon the theory that came from it. He was like, hey, like I still think that the patient therapist relationship is key. It just needs to have some structure. And some of those writings are, foundational in some of the stuff that we just take for granted today in terms of therapeutic alliance and how the healing sometimes can come from just the connection between the therapist and patient, right? But meaning that therapy was just experimentation and literally just shoot from the hip, and I don't think that that's good, right? You can't expect anything other than that from a profession which is just born out of nowhere. But we think about therapy being this like polished up profession with scientific guidelines nowadays, and like all the history of it that led us to here was people who were just being creative and artistic and then wondering, did this thing work because of this or did it work because of this? And can I turn this into a larger theory, which would say that if we did something like this, it would work in a lot of situations, right? So I think the upside of being creative and being more on the side of the spectrum closer to art with all the ethics and all the guidelines and all this treatment knowledge is that we're actually doing the profession. We're actually being the therapist in the way it was conceptualized originally.
100%. And I
Yeah.
love hearing you talk about theory. And I promised members in my IP program that I would push you a little today because they
Push me.
asked this was the question they asked me. This is something to push you on for later on, like not in right now. But they're like, theory is a hard concept to grasp. And I said, that's, you're right. And
Yeah.
I have a friend who has created a concept called Seriously, and we were going to talk about theories in a digestible way so they don't seem so scary and overwhelming.
Mhm.
Because they were like, is there just remember when we started that book of theory? Like we had all like I started adding to it and it was like an Excel spreadsheet and it had
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah. Sure, I still work on them.
yes, I know, me too. And I'm just like, man, like there are so many different theories, and I think it's time we start talking about them in ways that like a normal person can understand versus and kind of clear out the noise a little bit.
Yes.
Because I think
Yes.
when you hear Freud, you get like, oh, that's means all this other stuff. So like, no way.
Right.
There's gems in that. What do
Yeah.
you don't throw the, what did Dr. Gonzalez say? Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, just let's take some of that out and like understand that concept. That's why I love an integrative approach because you can take a little bit from everything and make it your own and your practice style.
Yeah.
Because even how we have grown, how we have you know, gone through our transformational journeys, like theories support our process. Like so how we understand ourselves, how change happens, it's important to know that. But I know most people are just like, there's just got to be a book somewhere that just has all these in it. And I'm like, I mean, I have an Excel spreadsheet-ish, but I don't think it's user friendly.
No, it's not. It's not. And that if that turned into a book, it wouldn't be a helpful book.
It wouldn't.
Um, yeah, no. Okay. I actually this is a really I love this question because it's true. It is overwhelming, and it does seem like what the hell? Like where would I even start? I want to share a couple things about the way that I approach theory, and maybe it'll be helpful. Maybe it's different styles. But I think about everything in the world as being built off of something before it.
Mhm.
Okay. So, if you want to understand where we are now, if you go backwards, you can find somebody that had an idea, which then he or she morphed into this idea, which the one that we have now, right? And so I think about it more from a history lens, that historically, if you can go back in time, you can really understand like something which is very complex today, but you can reverse engineer it. And so you can't really take a book of all the theories and find the information that you're looking for, because that's basically like I want to learn everything about everything so I know everything.
Yep.
What are you doing? Like what are you interested in, or what clinically what are you practicing, which you can really assume is built off of other people's work. If you go backwards, then you'll have a better understanding of it because you'll have rebuilt it. You'll have reverse engineered it. I reverse engineer everything in terms of theory.
Yep.
That's how I did it with improv. And I ended up going back to the early 1900s, and finding out that there are people who have done this kind of work for over 100 years.
Yep.
The interesting thing about when you go back in history is that a lot of times you can find that like somebody was already doing this.
Yep.
Whatever it is, like you think it's something new, but it could be something that's repackaged, right? Or it could be something that like nobody's really claiming it's new. You just never knew that it was done before, in the past, right? So I think you can go let's say for on a timeline. You can go from here and you can go backwards, or you can go all the way to like 100 years ago and build your way back up, right?
Yep.
So like for example, let's say with improv theory, right? So improvising is a skill which you can learn now by going to a local improv class, right? If you go back, let's say to 1930s, there was a lady, Viola Spolin, who turns out was a social worker in Chicago in Hull House, working with immigrant children who didn't speak each other's languages and didn't really speak English. And a lot of them were orphans, and they didn't know what the hell they were going to do in this country. She started using theater games as a way to see if she can get them to connect to each other, and spontaneous theater games. And what
Mm.
she found was that they started working together, they started enjoying each other's company, and that the divide between, even sometimes like beef between like kids who were from this country versus that country, like it all started to go down. and they started to enjoy it, and that became a major focus of hers. Okay, so Viola Spolin had a son who went by Paul Sills, who opened the first improv theater in America in the 50s, which then became known as Second City. Okay, so Second City, still around today, Second City became the place where you go to train to become an improviser.
Wow.
And right, and then the next like kind of level of it was somebody named Del Close. Del Close, not a clinician, not a stable person at all. Like it's legendary how unstable he was, but he trained everybody who ended up on Saturday Night Live. Okay. And so now Second City, and then Second City splintered off, and now there's a whole bunch of like new organizations, and Second City's still around, right? So if you wanted to go to an improv class today and you looked it up and there was a Second City in your area, you were in New York, Chicago, whatever, and you went to Second City, you'd be going to somewhere that was created by the chain that was started by Viola Spolin,
Wow.
right? And so when you understand what Viola Spolin was trying to do and you read her writing, then it will change the way that you experience today,
Yep.
right? And so that's the way that I view theory. I view theory as you reverse engineer it, and then you can really understand like what this amazing thing that I get to hold in my hand today is, where did it come from, and how did they invent it in the first place? And then you could recreate it, or you can add to it, and you can be the next one in the chain.
Yeah, it's like the way they started to do improv with dance. Someone
Right.
saw was like, oh, we can do it this way, or we can do it this way, or it's like it's all like at the end of the day, like it's totally possible. Just it's going to take some deep diving. It's going to take some education. It's going to take some research. But then, like once you know it, like you can speak so confidently about improv now, you're not hiding it anymore. Like literally, the improv therapist, like right behind you. And I love that. So, message to all of you: reverse engineer any modality that you're thinking about or wanting to integrate into your practice, and you can find a way to link it. And if you're stuck with that or you have questions, you can always let me know. We can always get creative together and see how what we can find. But I always say, like, when it comes to healing, we all speak the same language. It's just really trying to figure out what umbrella that might fall under based
Yeah.
on what knowledge already exists.
Right.
Yeah. So how
Yeah.
can people find you if they want to follow you and all that stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm the underscore improv therapist on Instagram, and the improvtherapist.com is my website. And LinkedIn, YouTube, we have the Improv Therapist podcast. We have a lot of good stuff that's
Yeah.
building up. And really the Improv Therapist, and search Juda Alcabes, and you'll find all my stuff, and you can get in touch with me through all those platforms. I'm
And
a
I'll
chat.
I'll I'll write it underneath your stuff too, in this video. So people can go and find you that way. And maybe you'll think about your theories, Leah.
Yeah. Oh, that definitely on the list there. Um, Yeah. The other thing I was going to say about searching for theory and going backwards is that you do have to look outside of like your, let's call it like the initial Google search.
Mhm.
So if you Google, where does improv come from? Like you're not going to get directed to the whole chain of it. And so this is where you do have to be a nerd, and you're going to do stuff that people don't understand. You got to look for the stuff that people no longer have like immediate access to. So
Yep.
like for example, I when I started teaching psychopathology, I looked online and I found every single DSM. So I have DSM-2, which was really hard to find. I have DSM-1, which is impossible to read because none of that language is used anymore. But I got all the DSMs. If you're going to tell me that that you're in 2024, we use this phrase, right, to mean this, I want to know how we got there, because I'm not just going to throw out a diagnosis because you look like it. I'm going to throw out a diagnosis because I have a theory that says you fit this cluster, right? And in order for me to have that theory, I want to understand, how did they make the cluster, right?
Yeah.
So when you're looking for the stuff, the information, you become an explorer is the way I would put it. Like you are exploring and you're just gathering as much information. You kind of see the same thing written twice in two places and you go, okay, that seems interesting, right? Um, you sometimes you find like an offshoot like, oh, this guy was actually like really big in the development of this theory, but like for whatever reason he wasn't so well known. But like I got my hands on his writings and it like all locks together, right?
Yep.
So you become a detective with it and don't just Google it and then pick the first thing that you see. Sometimes I'll start with a Wikipedia page and I'll see like, okay, so this is the historical timeline of it. Now I'm going to do a deep dive into this person's work. I'm going to look for this person's work. I'm going to go to the FAU library and pull dusty psychoanalysis books off the shelf
I
and
actually
read.
do that too, which is
Oh yeah, I love that. I
like
love.
I don't go that deep, but I like I'm just, I usually will ask you at that point, like, and usually you know it because somehow you've done the research. So,
Yeah,
but
I get
yeah,
excited about it. I was reading a Heinz Kohut article this week, and I was very excited
yes,
on
see, this is
narcissism.
where me and you see. Everyone in my group thinks they're like, oh, Tina's such a nerd. She nerds out over this stuff, but then they don't know you and
Yeah,
how far you go. I climb up to the slide, you're just like, whoo, all the way down, and I'm like, looks great up here. But I love it. Thank you so much for
yeah,
sharing your story with us, your love for
yeah.
theory, your love for improv. I'm hoping that people will get from this conversation inspired, and to know that like there's ethical and professional ways to do this work. It just takes a little bit of time and dedication, but totally doable. So thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us, and hopefully we'll have
Have
you on.
me. Yeah,
All right. See ya.
amazing. All right, thank you.
Bye.